Okay, I guess we're close enough. We will call to order public meeting number 58 of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on March 14th, 2013. I think we should start today with a moment of silence for Wes Welker.
That wasn't a moment of silence.
I hope they know what they're doing. Approval of minutes, we don't have any minutes, I
I don't
think.
have any minutes.
Okay.
That's for Monday's, Tuesday's meeting.
On the master schedule, I think everybody knows we're working as hard as we can on the Schedule 2, on the Category 2 license schedule for the time being. Our expected date of award, assuming there aren't too many lawsuits and appeals and so forth, is early December. Trying to move that back, but we don't really have anything more to add. We apparently have got our third of 4 sites for the slots parlor clarified yesterday. That'll speed the process up. And as everybody heard the other day, we're pushing to get a decision made on the 4th. But beyond that, I don't think we really have anything to talk about on the master schedule. Anything else of administration? Director Wells.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I expect to be brief. As Commissioner Cameron mentioned at the last open public meeting on this topic, the investigations are proceeding. We've got, all 11 applicants are submitting additional documentation that is being plowed through by the consultants as well as members of the Massachusetts State Police. We've had meetings with individuals on other certain issues and are developing the strategy going forward to do this in the most efficient manner possible, recognizing that the Commission is looking to expedite the Slots 2 license. We're doing everything to prioritize those investigations, and we're monitoring that. And I will update the Commission as those proceed so that you can get a better idea of expected timelines for that. There is some concern about the April 15th deadline. I'll be perfectly frank about that. And I've indicated
You
to...
mean that you can
Right.
get all the investigations done?
Well,
by
for the
then?
slots license,
slots,
so there's
yeah, right.
4. So, we're working with the applicants. A lot of the, the investigative process has to do with compliance. When we send document requests, they have to send back the documents in order to be reviewed. So, I've been indicating to the applicants that as part of this investigatory process, we need their cooperation, and that has to be a partnership, and we need those documents to come in. Generally, I'm getting a decent response depending on the applicant. So we're just have an ongoing process going through those. Obviously, it's not appropriate to give details about those investigations in the public meeting, but that's how those are proceeding. And we continue to review qualifiers, any additional qualifiers that none have been identified since the last meeting. I will update the Commission if new qualifiers do become apparent, and those new qualifiers will then have to submit the original forms, and then we'll have to go through that process. So we're just monitoring that with all of the applicants.
Do we have information that's in the hands of third parties that over whom we have no control?
No.
It's going to be pertinent to these investigations?
Oh, you mean, well, you mean...
We ran into, for example, on some of our background investigations, we've been held up, personnel background investigations, by jurisdictions beyond Massachusetts not responding to requests for tax information.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So, for example, we are entering into an MOU with Maryland so that we can share information, and get information on other background investigations they've done. So we are working with other states in order to expedite that process. I would say the only other third party, it's similar to that situation you describe, is when the applicant is submitting information. So say they need certain bank records, they've got to go to their bank has to provide those records, which they then provide to the investigator. So they need to rely on other parties as well. So it's not always within their control as well, and we have to recognize that and just be as expeditious as possible.
Well, tax returns have been the problem, I think, in our background checks.
In our background
Out-of-state
check.
tax.
Yeah.
Out-of-state tax.
Yeah,
tax.
and I will say, as we look into the individual applicants, there are some international connections that we are investigating. So obviously, if an applicant has international connections that we need to investigate, that's a little more difficult than doing a stateside investigation. So we need to be mindful of that. And sometimes when you go down a path, you find out, oh, there is this connection over here that you don't know initially. So we just have to be mindful of that and flexible in, in recognizing that a thorough and complete job is the most important part of this, because we only get one chance to do the investigation. So we're just mindful of that while recognizing the commission's timeline.
I think we want to commend you and your staff, I mean, and also make sure the public appreciates what a colossal job this is.
Yeah.
And when you have to send back, many of these forms came in, many of these 21,000 pages were not redacted properly.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had to go send them back, and then we send them back, we have to check them again, and it's an incredible process.
Mm-hmm.
And appreciation to you.
Thank you.
To you and the troopers and so forth who are doing this.
Yeah.
But also I want the public to understand what a colossal job it is. And we don't want to send out one item of information that was not supposed to go out.
Right.
That's meant to be, we don't
Right.
want accidentally to put a
Right.
phone number or an account number or something
Right.
like that, a personal address that we're not supposed to send out, so we have to be incredibly fastidious.
Right.
But it's a massive, massive job.
Right, and I will comment along those lines that we are very mindful of that, so, and we are having state police, again, go through these documents, and we've set up a process, we've set up the software, we've done it all, and this will take some time, but all applicants will have an opportunity to review what we've put together before it may be made public, so there will be a second check on that, so
Right.
that should alleviate any concern before anything is made public.
So they will sign off on our corrections.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
Okay.
So I will have a form and a
Right.
process for that in place when those get sent to the applicants.
Okay. Great.
Okay? Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Director.
Ombudsman Ziemba, Public Information and Outreach. I don't see Joelle.
I think he might be a little bit late.
Okay.
We can start with that one, no?
Okay. I can introduce two of our three RPA guests, Stephen Smith, Executive Director of the SERPED, Southeast Regional Planning and Economic District, and Timothy Brennan, Executive Director of Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Both of these gentlemen and their organizations have already been helpful to us in a number of respects, and as is being proposed, are willing to be helpful further. But I want to thank you both for pitching in on a number of different occasions already and in helping us out in what is a pretty big and challenging task for many of your member communities. Do you want to take it from there and
Sure, thank you.
kick this off?
So, in addition to these gentlemen, who I want to say thank you to publicly, they've been a tremendous support over the last couple of months, and as they've done yeoman service, contributed a massive number of hours to help plan what we're going to discuss today. But I also want to thank a couple members of their staffs, Mark Rassicott and Charlie Tykotsky from MAPC, and then Jim Mazik, also from the PVPC, contributed a lot to what we're going to discuss today. So. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just provide the general overview of the plan. You have a memo before you. Then I'll ask Steve and Tim to briefly describe their agencies and their regions, how they relate to our function. I'd ask them to talk about similar multiple community projects that they've been engaged in and why they believe that they can help with surrounding community issues. After that discussion, then I'd like to address several issues that have been identified in a number of our conversations. We reached out to numerous host communities, to applicants, and we've heard from a number of surrounding communities as well about how we could go about providing assistance on the surrounding community question. So in overview, we are proposing a plan whereby the regional planning agencies can help us on questions relating to potential surrounding communities. We believe that this should be seen as a service that is provided by the commission, and we very much recommend that this should be a voluntary service that could be adopted by applicants if they choose to do so, and could be adopted by communities if they choose to avail themselves of our services. After numerous discussions, we believe that the voluntary nature of this program is fairly important to how it should go forward, given some of the other provisions in the statute. Specifically, in regard to applicants, over the course of the last couple of months, we have identified numerous regulations that we are proposing regarding potential surrounding communities and how the process should go forward with surrounding communities. Notably, what we've outlined is a draft definition of what a surrounding community may be. We've also recently adopted as a proposed draft a process whereby communities could ask for disbursements of dollars for technical assistance funding if indeed they cannot reach an agreement with an applicant to receive those dollars. So I think that there are numerous protections for surrounding communities included in the Gaming Act, and we've added very significant protections for surrounding communities in our draft regulations. So given some of those processes, applicants could very much determine that they would like to move forward with that process rather than the process that we're outlining today, and it is certainly up to them. We note that every applicant will be judged based on how they will conduct their outreach activities to surrounding communities, and they'll also be judged about the quality of their mitigation efforts towards impacts that are identified. So this commission is focused a lot on competition, and we think that competition is a very good thing when it comes to helping to address mitigation issues on potential surrounding communities, because it is in the interest of applicants to try to do as good a job as they can in addressing some of these impacts as they see fit, but they will be evaluated by the commission. So given that context, we recommend that this service that we're about to outline should be a voluntary service so that an applicant can move forward on their own devices as they see under the statute and under our regulatory structure, or we could provide the services through regional planning agencies, and we're recommending this because we believe that it might be a much more streamlined process. It might help be a little bit more participatory, and we believe it might be able to focus some real energy in a direction that is useful to both applicants and surrounding communities and host communities.
It's a little counterintuitive, and it took me a while to sort of get my head around it, to think about this process being started by the applicant. You think, well, this is about the surrounding communities. What does the applicant have to do with it? But it is important to clarify that the duty in our law is for the applicant to negotiate agreements with the surrounding communities. So they are going to be the protagonist, if you will, or the proactive party in this project. And if they see the idea of doing it in a collegial, combined way, if they see that as being an asset to them, then they would trigger this process. But it is a little counterintuitive to understand why this has to be started by the applicant.
Right. So notably, we also believe that it should be voluntary on behalf of the communities. We think that there could be tremendous efficiencies by this program for communities, especially communities that are smaller communities that rely on a lot of voluntary boards and voluntary personnel to be able to rely on the expertise of the RPAs in each one of the regions. And it's potentially a very efficient process, because you could have a situation where one gaming applicant is surrounded by numerous communities, each with very similar or the same questions to answer. And so they could each be individually going to ask the applicant for funding to basically look at many same or similar questions. So potentially you might be able to avoid a lot of staff time going ahead and procuring services for consultants and outside specialists to help advise communities. And this might actually be a more efficient way so that dollars are used more efficiently to take a look at impacts. So that's quite an introduction to the services that we're going to describe, without actually telling you what the services are. But let me tell you what they are. So There are 3 tasks that we envision for each of the regional planning agencies. And it is up to the applicants to determine whether or not they would want to avail themselves of all 3 of them, 2 of the 3, 1 of the 3, or none of the 3, as I just described. So the first task is as a convener. So what we envision is that the RPAs will organize up to 2 informational forums per region, and region is really basically defined as the region that is surrounding each of the gaming facilities. And those will be followed by a series of task force meetings for each of the specific gaming facility. And in those task forces, it will be up to the applicant to help present present their application in the best way that they see forth, and to provide a lot of information to the potential surrounding communities about impacts that they've been identifying throughout their process. The second phase of the scope is technical analysis and assistance, and this is sort of what I just described, whereby we are hoping that we could utilize the services of the regional planning agencies to take a look at the data that will be provided by both the applicants and the host communities. But at the appropriate time, there will probably be a tremendous store of information about what potential impacts there could be, not only to the host communities, but to the regions in which they sit. And so it is our proposal that the RPAs assemble the data that is being compiled by the applicants, and then in turn take the information that will very much, in all likelihood, be produced by the host communities, take those 2 big groups of data and evaluate that data in order to determine impacts on surrounding communities. It is very likely that host communities will spend a great amount of time evaluating what the gaming facility may do to their communities, but after many conversations with host communities across the Commonwealth, it very much looks like many communities are going to take a regional approach, even in their own reviews. So host communities are going to take a look at the gaming facility in the context of the region and within their neighbors. And that's good news. That's good news, I think, to everyone. It's good news to the host communities so that they can determine what the real impacts are, but it's obviously very helpful to us in being able to assemble some of that data to take a look at. So why we think that this is a little bit more of an efficient process, instead of each individual community asking for an independent study, what we're hoping to do is to take a look at the existing data and basically do a peer review of that data. So with the expertise that the RPAs have on site, they can take a look at the studies that will, in all likelihood, be put together by very reputable firms and determine very objectively whether or not the data is sufficient, whether or not it addresses a lot of the issues that have been identified in some of these task force meetings, whether or not further studies need to be done, or whether or not tweaking needs to be done to each of the individual studies. And thereby, this might be a lot more efficient way to take a look at some of the issues, but it would be able to provide the objectivity to a potential surrounding community that they would desire in looking at numbers. As you can imagine, as with any development, communities are often skeptical of the data that is being put forward, not because of the development itself, but that just the way that it works. So we think that with the reputations and the relationships of the RPAs that they've been grooming for years and years and decades, that this might be a really effective way to objectively measure impacts. And we have to note that impacts is what the commission will be looking at. It's what's called in by the statute to take a look at. And we're hoping that in the context of all these conversations with communities, that that's what they'll be looking at as well.
As opposed to what?
Well, as you can imagine, there are some concerns that you have entities that are coming into the state, and there are views that there might just be a lot of money available to help out with services across the board.
I see.
And-
This is not a gratuitous windfall. This is to address impacts. Right.
So our whole focus has been on, let's determine what the real impacts are. That's what the commission will evaluate, that's what the statute anticipates, rather than atmospherics.
Right, okay.
Task three is that the RPAs would help communities with agreements that they would enter into with applicants. So these could be in many shapes or forms, but notably, the statute calls for surrounding community agreements to be included within each application before the commission. So it'll be up to each applicant to determine which communities are surrounding communities for the purposes of submitting their applications to the commission. But as you can imagine, as you go through the process, initially, numerous communities will be invited to participate to say, are you interested in learning about the act? Are you interested in learning about potential impacts? And over the course of time, as more and more of the studies are finalized and more of the impacts are understood, some communities may eventually drop out of the process and saying, well, okay, I do realize after looking at the data that potentially I may not be as impacted as I once thought that I would be. But then you might have a situation where at the end of the day, the applicant believes that some communities rise to the level of surrounding communities such that they are truly impacted and that their impact should be mitigated. And that there might be some communities that are still at the end of the process that have identified an impact or a lesser impact, and they may say, well, is there any way that you are going to address the impacts for us, even if you don't believe that you are a surrounding community? And it's up to each applicant on how they want to address either these regional impacts or specific impacts to communities that may not actually be surrounding communities in the eyes of the applicant. And the applicant could address that in many, many different ways, and notably they could either just include measures to address impacts in their application, or even you could imagine that an applicant could even have a regional agreement that would address or memorialize impacts that they are measures that they would take to reduce those impacts with a group of communities, even if they are not a surrounding community. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to let Steve and Tim give a little bit of the background that I described.
Sure. Let me start by saying what a pleasure it's been to work with John, and I think you made a great choice. He's a great representative of the commission. You've been terrific to work with in this process. As the chairman mentioned, I'm Steve Smith. I'm with Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District, which is all contained within what you consider Region C. And we have two active Category 2 proposals, plus a Native American proposal in the region. And the scope, as John described it, that we are offering is what regional planning agencies, this is what we do, and this is what we've been doing for basically more than 50 years. While the type of development may be different, casino as opposed to a mall or a large transportation project or an industrial park, the issues are the same. And we're dealing with traffic, we're dealing with housing impact, we're dealing with workforce impact. And so this is not new terrain for us. And in many of these issues, we're also involved in extensive, sometimes adversarial public processes where we have to bring people together to talk about these issues. In our case, for example, the South Coast Rail Project, which has been going on for years and years and is sometimes contentious, but we sit as an objective third party bringing different people together to talk about these issues. We are answerable to boards, to regional boards of public officials, elected and appointed public officials. And we very much rely on credibility and trust we've developed over years by doing objective technical analysis, which is what we're suggesting here. Now, as John mentioned, this is an optional process that's being proposed, but I think it's a good one because it unifies all the parties around sort of an objective third party to run this process. And I can speak from experience, being on the other side of the coin with the Wampanoag proposal in Middleborough in 2008, in which there was no process at all. The surrounding communities, the host community, the proponent never spoke to each other. It quickly became adversarial, fragmented, and chaotic, frankly, and it made it much more difficult for all parties involved. And I think the proposal that we're suggesting here would make things run a lot smoother for you, for the proponents, for the host community, for the surrounding communities doing it through a single source. On the technical end, We're not proposing to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of studies being done, but we have a track record, and we do all the time through MEPA reviews and so forth, doing objective technical reviews of the impacts of these proposals. So this is not new to us. The subject area may be new, but the impacts are pretty much the same. We're good at it. We've done it for a long time, and we hope to be able to help the commission out. And I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying, pivot to Steve's comment about working with John. He really is a terrific team player and has helped us out a lot, and so too our municipalities. I'm Tim Brennan. I'm from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Our Planning Commission is one of 13 in the state. We exist statewide. We're put together in the late 1950s by enabling legislation which basically said communities that could sit in a region which was defined by the state could join up one with another to work on problems and solving them, or to chase opportunities that might not be available individually. Our region, to be politically correct, is the Midwest of Massachusetts. We're based in Springfield, our largest city, but you might know us by the higher education concentration out our way, UMass, 5 colleges, and we have a cluster of colleges in the Springfield area. Our region is 625,000 people, about 1,200 square miles, so a medium-sized metropolitan area, about the size, just a little less than Rhode Island spatially. And we have every type of community from the urban core cities such as Springfield, Holyoke, and Chicopee, the classic suburbs, and lots and lots of tiny towns. Our agenda is A to Z. We work on everything from aquifer protection to zoning, and we have, I think, a stellar group of men and women who work in planning fields and tend to specialize. Transportation planners, housing planners, land use planners, environmental planners. And we try to bring that expertise to bear in teams to work on, again, issues that are either problems or opportunities. So taking John's list of the tasks and trying to connect those, convener, our agencies tend to be the kitchen table for the region we're in. This is where communities come together in small groups or large groups to talk about issues. And I think the one that's most germane here is the fact that we've actually been involved for 5 years with the communities around the town of Palmer. Those communities interested and concerned about what impacts might spill out over Palmer's borders if a casino were to be developed in our community, and we have been focused on that and have gained some knowledge and expertise. We were asked to do this. This is not something we were pushed into. We were asked to provide that service, which I think underscores why the convening function is one of our sort of bedrock activities. In terms of technical assistance, probably the most relevant to this kind of endeavor, because we are, as John has underscored, talking about mitigation of impacts, is we review every MEPA that comes through the region. So 43 cities and towns, you can imagine, on any given year, those MEPA reviews come through. Sometimes they're at the entry level, small impacts, and sometimes they're very complicated projects that require an environmental impact report. And we would bring, obviously, those skills to bear, and again, in a multidiscipline sort of way. Traffic tends to be one that comes up very, very frequently, but environmental issues, stormwater runoff, historic preservation, and on I can go. And lastly, I think the convener and the agreement sort of go together. Our ability to be a convener gives us, again, a platform from which to bring communities together, try to use the sort of wisdom of crowds to come up with agreements that work. A couple of examples, and these are the ones that have been around for decades. We have some of our region that's served with aquifers, underground reservoirs. We have compacts among those communities so that they work together to protect a common natural resource. And they do that by making sure they review any project that could put that aquifer at risk together. Barnes Aquifer Protection Advisory Committee is that group. Another example, also on the natural resource side, that we've been working on for decades is the cleanup of the Connecticut River, our premier resource. We have to get to Class B water. We have that now, except from the Holyoke Dam southerly to the Connecticut line. So we have all the affected communities working together to get to that Class B standard. Not quickly, but eventually, how we'll make that happen. So that's sort of a profile of what we're up to. We think this process makes sense. Again, as John has said, this is a voluntary process. We don't expect municipalities would come to this unless they're totally comfortable with it and us. And many communities have told us and come to meetings that that is the fact, but in the final analysis, it's going to be up to them to make that important decision. So I'll stop there.
Our third guest is Mr. Joel Barrera from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. John, are you going to ask him to speak as well, or?
Yeah, so Joel, what we've been talking about is how the missions of each of the RPAs fit within the scope that we've identified, and we've also been talking about a little bit about some of the historical activities that the RPAs have conducted that relate to this matter as well.
Sure. No, I would just add, and I apologize for being a couple of minutes late, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, is the largest regional planning agency. We are the regional planning agency for metropolitan Boston, 101 cities and towns in our region. Our mission is to promote smart growth and regional collaboration. So, I mean, the same sorts of activities that Steve and Tim have talked about, bringing communities together, whether it's around planning for South Weymouth Air Station, or whether it's planning the Green Line extension, or whether it's coordinating with police and fire and EMS around Homeland Security funds. I mean, that's what we do, is we facilitate collaboration among communities, oftentimes bordering communities. And, again, we did not necessarily seek this role, although our communities have always been interested in this issue. We get together with, especially the work that Tim did out in Western Mass. We have put together a number of forums related to the Gaming Commission, put together some ideas in collaboration with our colleagues at the other RPAs. We actually drafted quite a bit of the language that made it into the final bill. And then I would say in the fall, the Gaming Commission asked us and hired us to put together the forum related to mitigation. And so I would just say we have close to 80 staff people, expertise in many areas related to transportation, land use, environment, all of the kinds of things that Tim and Steve's talked about. But if you choose to use this, we would certainly welcome the partnership.
Great. So, Mr. Chairman, what I was going to do, I was going to go into some of the issues that we identified throughout our meetings across the state, and we can just sort of take them one by one.
Let me just ask you, since we're talking about the geographic representation, we now apparently have a bidder in Worcester. And is Danvers in your region? There may be one, apparently, we hear in Danvers as well. So that's covered. But what about the Worcester?
No, that's the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. We've had conversations with them quite some time ago, but we need to reach out with them with specifics of what we've been talking about.
But the presumption would bring in another regional planning agency,
Yes.
the same thing, yeah.
Correct. And I would just add, they're colleagues of ours. They've been part of the monthly conversations that we've had on this at the MARPA table. And already, even if Milford were to go forward and participate in this, that's borders both of the commissions. And
So that's between the two?
Milford is in ours, but
Okay.
but everything west of that is
Right.
relates to Central Mass. And we've had conversations with Vera, who's their chief planner, and we would already be expecting to work with them if Milford was one of the places
Right.
that we decided to work.
Okay.
So the first recommendation is on the voluntary aspect of the program. We've gone over that a little bit, but if I could get into a couple specifics. Some of the concerns that we heard were that even though we're putting this forward as a voluntary program, just by the fact that we're putting it forward could be seen as something that is pushing bidders into the program. And throughout our conversations, we have noted to them that no, that this is very much a voluntary program, and that at least I've been saying is that the commission will be evaluating all of the applicants on the quality of their outreach and the quality of the mitigation. And I think that would be an important, I recommend that the commission also adopt that as a policy that just because applicants do not go along with this program, that should have no bearing on how we take a look at their application.
Right, okay.
Well, could I ask why?
Well,
I mean, just because no issue
Yeah.
ought to go unchallenged.
well, my recommendation flows from the fact that this program is basically on top of the statute. It's a voluntary program. The statute sets out very specific ways in which applicants can proceed with surrounding communities. And so, we receive questions, is this consistent with the statute? And our bottom line is that I don't think anything is, any agreements that communities reach voluntarily with applicants would contravene the statute. But certainly, there's a process in the statute that applicants can follow, and if they choose to follow that statutory process, that they should not be seen as, that there shouldn't be any disadvantage to that.
Did you think, John, about making it obligatory? In order to streamline, in order to standardize, in order to equalize, about making this an obligatory?
I did. I was a little bit concerned about whether or not we would get challenges on whether or not we are contravening the statute if we did make it obligatory, because the statute outlines the process that each applicant shall engage in. Again, the commission does have pretty plenary authority.
Right.
But part of the hope here is that that applicants do a very good job at their outreach, and at the end of the day, this is a competitive process that the commission will be evaluating. So to the extent that we are heavily engaged in their process and we tell them what their process should be, that may have an impact on how they would be viewed by us. But if it's an entirely voluntary process, it is them making the determination that they want to engage in these services. And if for some reason that they don't like how it's going and they think that it's providing a disadvantage to their application, they don't have to participate.
It's also voluntary on the part of communities.
Exactly.
right? So, but at the same time, the commission has an obligation to look at the regional impact of each of these casinos. And so conceivably, you could have a community in the middle of an impacted area that declined to participate in this process while its neighbors all did.
Right.
What happens then? The applicant and that community negotiate if it's a surrounding community. They don't negotiate if the commission ultimately concludes it's not a surrounding community. But they play a role nonetheless in the regional impact in terms of roadways through,
Right.
water
Right.
usage, and the like. What?
Well, independent from the surrounding community section, the statute also calls for applicants to address the regional impacts.
Right.
So in their applications, the applicants need to address those concerns.
Right.
And so whether or not there's an actual agreement with that particular community, I would argue that it's still up to the applicant to show how they're addressing those regional concerns.
Yeah, I understand that, but I guess my question was inartfully phrased. It seemed, I mean, maybe it's a question of encouraging participation in this rather than requiring it, because it seems to me this is a process ideally suited to the regional aspects of the concerns that the commission is required to address. And having a hole in the middle of some region that doesn't interconnect with its neighbors, however unlikely, could adversely impact the commission's ability to address in a holistic manner the
Right.
regional impact.
Well, we hope that they see the benefits of this
Right,
process.
right.
And when I mention that this is a voluntary process, I do have to include just one footnote. Now, we have an involuntary disbursements process. So whereby communities, if they ask an applicant for a study or technical assistance, and the applicant chooses not to provide that assistance, the community can appear before the commission and petition the commission to get an involuntary disbursement. Now, one could imagine a situation whereby If the RPAs are engaged in taking a look at the needs across the region, but one particular community decided to not avail themselves of the services of the RPA, an applicant, in a contest of whether or not they should fund another study for the same purpose, they could very much raise that as an issue of saying, there is no need for this additional study because it is already being provided by the RPA. But I still believe that it's voluntary because the applicant, the community would still be able to make the case to the commission that for whatever reason, they didn't deem that this assistant was sufficient for their purposes, and they would be able to make that case.
I would add that whether or not a community is a participant in the process, when we're doing a technical analysis or review of that information, we can't ignore whether a community is a participant or not. We have to look at all the communities and all the impacts. So from a technical standpoint, there can't be a hole in the donut and no traffic, for example, in a particular community. So they'd have to be included from that perspective.
And don't they, the way you're laying this out, the communities retain the option to participate, but they also retain the ability to the arbitration process that comes at the end of our process, as the statute sets forth, in case there is no
Correct.
agreement.
Yeah, although this is a process designed to reduce
that.
the need to go to the arbitration process.
Right.
Yeah.
And we would think that that'd be a benefit to many parties,
Right.
including the commission, but
Right.
to the applicants themselves, because the uncertainty of what may happen in the arbitration process
Should work as an incentive.
should be an incentive to work on this type of a process. I'll put this concern into the voluntary aspect. I don't know if it exactly fits here, but one of the common concerns that we heard was that there's a tremendous amount of expense for all of these technical assistance that's being provided. We have 11 applicants that each one of them will be studied by the host community, studied by the applicant, and then you may have these other studies that will occur. What we're putting forward, we believe, is a way to efficiently do those studies, so there are not 5 or 6 or 7 studies, but potentially 3 studies that might take into account the whole. But still, in the course of our conversations with applicants and others, there is the concern that just the general process regarding surrounding communities is requiring many studies. And many of the studies, by the nature that this is a competitive process and we'll only have 2 Category 1 licenses, that all of this study will be for naught at the end of the day in a good many situations. So I think that we're getting a lot of pushback, maybe not, I'd like to say maybe not specifically about our plan, but in more general terms about how much study could occur within each one of these different developments. I think the bottom line is that the statute does call for this type of a study. The applicants are required to include numerous regional impact studies. They're required to identify impacts on host and surrounding communities and how they're going to address those impacts. And a lot of these are required by the statute. And indeed, how applicants will mitigate those concerns is part of the evaluation process that we've identified. But it's difficult to get beyond some of those issues in the first instance.
I think one thing I would like to underscore, though, is our idea is not to bring another layer of consultant studies into the mix. The idea is to use the expertise we have and use the studies that are produced by the host and the developer. And to parse out, this is satisfactory mitigation for issue A, B, or C. And this one hasn't gotten sufficient attention, needs more work. And again, the thing that is important to me is that the best mitigation is the mitigation that happens well before MEPA. At the front end, when you can work with the developer and tell he or she, here are the things that need to be addressed, and they get addressed, so that later on the process should go much more smoothly.
Within this context, just because it was an idea that was put forward, and we said that we would bring it forward to the commission, one of the alternatives that one of the entities put forward was that instead of all of these technical studies, that what could occur is that applicants could be encouraged to just donate additional funds to the Community Mitigation Fund, and it wouldn't be necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily require direct studies of the actual impacts at the surrounding communities, but it would be an after effect after the award as part of the Community Mitigation Fund. So the theory would be, in order to address impacts that are likely, more monies go into the fund, and that those could be addressed on a one-by-one basis through the application process. I'm not sure if a potential surrounding community would like that idea or not like that idea. Again, the mitigation fund is a competitive process, likely, where there may be many applications for a subset of dollars, at least in the first couple of years. But it was an idea that was put forward.
But that fund is really designed to provide remediation for things that weren't anticipated before the plan was approved and the application, the license granted, right? I mean, that's the main.
Yeah.
So it can't really be consistent with the statute, a substitute for the studies and planning that the statute requires. I mean, it's hard to see
Right.
how that would be, yeah.
Right.
Which they're not recommending it anyways.
Right, no, yeah.
But one thing that might be a good idea is that, because there's such tremendous, the statute does outline both the community agreements and also the Community Mitigation Fund as ways to mitigate impacts. And again, the mitigation fund should be available to address impacts that, primarily were not identified in the first instance. But one suggestion is that perhaps the commission do a little bit more publicizing of what the Community Mitigation Fund will be used for and how much funding will be available in it for the next 15 years. Because substantial dollars, 6.5% of Category 1 revenues and 10% of the gaming fees that are provided are put into that kitty, and those funds over time could be rather substantial. And by letting communities know that there is a fund available and that it will be populated by significant dollars, it may relieve some of the stress on all of the negotiations on what is a surrounding community or what is not a surrounding community, since we have previously indicated that communities that are impacted can access that fund. So one recommendation that we have, from the outside world and what we've been considering ourselves is that perhaps we could put together more of a concrete estimate, again, an estimate since we won't know what the revenues would be until we actually receive and choose our applicants, but of what type of funding might be available for communities out of that fund.
I'm not sure that I like that idea, because that, the other way to look at it is we really want pressure on communities and the applicants to identify issues up front in order that we don't have to backfill, because, that may seem like it's a lot of money, but it could disappear awfully quickly. And, I would like to have a real premium put on making sure that this is done and done thoroughly and done well up front. So what's left is, in that other fund, is a cushion for the unknown future rather than a substitute for rigorous work up front.
No, I agree with you, and I think there's a subset of that, which is that some communities which will not be designated as surrounding communities, so that there's not as much pressure on, that they are,
They won't
by
feel quite as
definition.
bad.
They won't feel quite as bad because they still could have
They still have a
impacts
shot.
that are.
Yeah, okay. That's a good point.
That are mitigated at a later point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, one of the other big issues that we encountered, and perhaps this was the biggest issue that we encountered across the state, is the issue of the fact that creating this process for allowing or helping communities review impacts may actually serve to create false expectations that communities will be surrounding communities at the end of the process. Because we think that the only fair way to at least begin the conversations with communities is to have perhaps an overly inclusive group before you define what the actual impacts are. And throughout the course of time, you will know which communities, or the applicant will become more comfortable which communities are truly the impacted communities. So the thought or the fear is that this process may bring in a number of communities that otherwise would not have been would not have thought that they might be a surrounding community and entitled to a surrounding community agreement, so that you may have a number of disappointed communities at the end, and that could result in the effect of exactly what we're trying to avoid, of communities pursuing either an agreement when there are little or no impacts. But it's our thought that our process is designed to evaluate the impacts so that over time, hopefully those communities, as we stated before, will understand that there may be those little impacts if they are truly, one of those faraway communities that have little impacts. And I don't know, these gentlemen have some experience with some of these questions, but I don't know if you wanted to.
I would welcome hearing from the three of you as to how easy it is to say no to a constituent community. I'm sure you've been through this process before, but that's among the concerns that you've said exist. It seems to me that's the only one that has some legs to it. The other, it's a voluntary process, it's an efficient process, it takes into account the enormous amounts of data that you have, and it obviates, in many cases, the need for additional studies. It seems to be producing more studies. But this one, I just wonder how you anticipate dealing with that. You invite a big group of communities to participate, and then at the end you say, well, 5 or 6 of you are not, in our view, surrounding communities.
Commissioner, I think we've already tried to say that. We've had a number of informational forums, one of which John came out for. I probably don't need to tell you, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance out there in terms of what the statute requires, period. Yeah. And so we find ourselves in the position of oftentimes just explaining the law, how it works, how it fits together. There are nuances, as the chairman pointed out, that people just don't get unless you walk them through. The second thing is, and we've had this experience already, is a huge expectation about this process being more about dollars than about mitigation. And we keep saying very clearly, this is about trying to focus on the mitigation issues, not about cash or how it's shared. That's a wholly different subject. It's not intended to be part of this. And it is difficult to say no, but if we don't say no, we're not believable. I mean, if we have any value, it has to be on our credibility. We're not going anywhere after this process is over. We're going to be still working with these same municipalities. They have to know us and have to trust us. So it may sound self-congratulatory, but you don't come to us for an answer that you want to hear. You come to us if you want an honest answer about an issue. That's
Does
part
any
of
of
it.
you, this is sort of the same point, Joel, so I was thinking something along the same line. Do the applicants see the RPAs as objective third parties?
I would say yes, and I would say that's what's really important about this process, that in the beginning, we suggest this be self-selecting in terms of communities involving themselves in the process, because they all fear what's going to happen, and they all fear the worst, and they all believe they're going to have massive traffic tie-ups and so forth. But as objective data comes out, and as we put our stamp on it and say, yes, we believe this is accurate, it does narrow it down, and it may be a naive hope, but it's the hope that as the data comes out, it defines what the real surrounding communities are, and it gets to be a more realistic list. But in the absence of information, everyone's going to think they're impacted, and hopefully as the process proceeds, that information becomes more clear, and the surrounding communities sort of become very obvious as driven by the data and not by the absence of data.
I mean, I would just underline, and I think it's important, we're getting back to your question, which is yes and no. I mean, only you, at the end of the day, will say, yes, you're a surrounding community or not.
Right.
We're not in the position to do that. I think what Steve was pointing out, which is, so everybody's struggling with this, this is an attempt to say, well, what's the common table so that we can have common understandings and technical expertise on as objective as possible around what is the mitigation, so that it's not just kind of rumors and and deals, but what is the information that we have in terms of what are the impacts? And that we can bring to the table, and I think that shapes how people perceive it. But we don't, only you have the ability to say yes or no at the end of the process.
No, that's absolutely true, but it's a question of helping with expectations is really more, rather than making a decision.
Can I say, I would flip that argument of the expectations, which is a good one. On the absence of having the option to participate, there could be the expectation that nobody ever told me, I was never a part of the process, that comes late in the process, which is something that I think we're trying to highlight. Everybody can come in, it's voluntary, there's no guarantees there will be data, but if there was no process like this, those expectations negatively could be taking place. And something tells me that they are, as what Tim says already.
Yeah, it's also about something I know from following your work you're really keen on, and that is transparency. The more we're transparent and the more we have opportunities for people to get information in a common, again, format, I think you build a relationship that has trust as its underpinning.
Right.
John, how do you plan to, let's take this case of this analysis of, I think I'm a impacted surrounding community, and there's a fair determination that I'm not. How does that information either get conveyed to you, or is it held so that further down the line in the process, when that same community now comes knocking at our door, that we have access to this information to, again, help us make a reasonable determination?
Well, I think it's anticipated that all the data that is available as part of this process can be part of our process as well. And indeed, in determinations of whether or not a community is a surrounding community or not, each of the different sides will put forward their best cases on why they think that is so. But sort of as Joel and others have mentioned, at the end of the day, prior to the application, it is up to the applicant to make the determination whether or not that community is a surrounding community.
Right.
And so that forms what will happen with the process at the end, because then the applicant can strike an agreement with that surrounding community. It could have a regional agreement. It could have many different forms of what may happen at the end of the day. Or a community that felt like it should have been a surrounding community might actually end up at our doorstep and make the case that they are a surrounding community or not. But hopefully, at that point, there'll be a very significant store of information that we can utilize and both sides can utilize in making their cases.
Okay. Another question, somewhat related, but I'm taking advantage of the fact that all three of you are here. There's a piece of a requirement of the statute which talks about how an applicant will fit into regional economic development plans. Obviously, I'm familiar with Tim and the ongoing evolution of the Pioneer Valley Plan for Progress. Do the other two regions here, do you have similar economic development plans which are going to be suitable information for us to have criteria and evaluate?
We do. I'd like to say it's sophisticated as the one in the Pioneer Valley. It's probably not, but yes, we are. We're all, I think, designated by the Economic Development Administration, U.S., to do annual economic development strategies or update them annually. We compile lots of statistics. We run processes where we bring together private sector, public sector officials to think about these issues, and so we all do it to some degree. Yeah.
And I would just add, we also are our economic development district. We have a staff of 4 economic development specialists who would be available to assist with.
Can you give, just sort of for information's sake, could you give a sense sort of the methodology of measuring an impact? One additional trip is probably not going to require mitigation, 1 million is. How do you, in between 1 and 1 million, same with schools, 1 kid probably doesn't require mitigation, 1,000 kids does. How do you measure impact?
Someone once said, don't try to answer a complicated question with a simple answer. It all depends. On the traffic side, there's all kinds of criteria that's used, depending upon land use, to give you numbers or orders of magnitude. If you have this type of facility, shopping center, hospital, whatever, you're gonna get this amount of trips. This is done by nationwide analysis. So, one of the easiest ways is you're going through those guidebooks and you're testing what the order of magnitude is saying versus what the proponent is telling you in their analyses. And if there's a big discrepancy, demands attention. But it also depends on the location. What kind of roads do you have to access a particular facility? You're gonna have different levels of capacity depending upon the entrance and exit. So it's gonna be very, very site-specific. It's gonna be tied to a lot of data that's been collected because you're doing environmental impact analyses for projects large and small and in between.
Have you
That didn't help.
thought about the fact that, well, I'm sure you've thought about everything, but I know in Atlantic City, there were many surrounding towns, 30, 40 minutes outside of Atlantic City, who, they were farming towns. They were very sparsely populated. With the onset of casino after casino, developers built housing. And so it wasn't clear initially that they would be impacted, but after the fact, certain towns built, and it had the developers had the idea, wow, they're gonna need housing, and so certain towns just grew enormously, and they hadn't, so that's roads, those were schools, all of those things happened after the fact.
Well, again, one of the things about mitigation on, again, the traffic side is the best mitigation measure of all is move the place of work and the place of residence closer together. So I can speak in our region because our community colleges are working on training programs to try to hire local workers. So to the extent that you move the workers to be closer to where the casino is, traffic mitigation measure number one. The other thing, again, that's different about casinos, again, that you all would all know, it's not like the traffic operates in a peak in the morning, afternoon. You've got this steady flow. That has an ability to compensate for the capacity side. So each of these are sort of looked at, you're working off the data that the proponent is telling you, these are the impacts. And if the impact is of a significance, here's how I'm gonna offset them. So we see the job as sort of truth-finding about, does that all make sense? Does that square with our expertise? Where it doesn't, that provokes a conversation. I think I used this example when you were all out in Springfield back in August. Sometimes we both are not sure of what the impact is going to be. And when that happens, what we tend to ask for is go forward with your proposal, but have a monitoring study after your development is on the ground. If you were melting down this intersection, you come back in and you mitigate that impact that now has surfaced. It's become a reality. So those are the tools that we've used over and over and over again, working with all kinds of mostly MIPA reviews.
And I would only add though, because one of the problems with MIPA is it does not include housing. And our executive director is in Washington DC, so he couldn't be here, but he's a housing specialist. And I know one of his main concerns as we look at these developments is what are the housing impacts, and making sure that people put some attention, because that is an area that people tend to put less attention to. But it's real. I mean, this is not going to be Atlantic City, but it's real.
What's been the reaction from the applicants as you've discussed this with them now? Jim?
I think for the most part, it's been a pretty positive response. We had many different applicants say that they would like to move forward with this process. Some are already contacting us to move forward with the process. Some applicants may choose not to do so, and they may want to take advantage of just the statute. But you've heard some of the concerns that they've all put forward. One other concern that I just wanted to focus on is a matter of timing. our document hopefully addresses some of those concerns. There is a big concern out with the applicants that somehow that this could disturb their ability to get a host community agreement. And I think we all realize that unless there's a host community agreement, there are no surrounding community agreements. So, yeah, you have to allow the parties to put together their plans, put together their studies, and have the conversations at some time prior to engaging fully in the surrounding community negotiation process. But that said, we're working under a concrete or a finite period of time. So our recommendation is that timing should be very flexible, and that we should work with the applicants, the host communities, in working on the timing of when this begins and when it gets really ramped up. But there's a caveat there that we have to take into account that there has to be enough time before our deadlines to enable surrounding communities to really understand the impact. And that's not going to be the same answer in each situation. Categories of applicants obviously are going to have much less impacts than others, so potentially they could move a little bit quicker. But we're hopeful that we can have these beneficial scoping sessions with the applicants on how it should move forward.
I had two little points from your memo. If the proponent elects to follow this process, they will deposit sufficient funds in escrow with the commission. What about the 50K in the 400? Is that the first 50 into this bucket? Or what, is this in addition to that?
This would likely be in addition, because in all likelihood, the first 50,000 will probably be used up by
By the
most
host-
host communities.
That's right, okay,
And
yeah.
so what we're asking is that any additional amounts, either for additional surrounding communities or for this process, would have to be then deposited into our funds.
Right.
And the process would be similar to the host community agreements or those fees by way of that letter of authorization. Is that?
That's right.
So,
And then there was a sentence in task 2 in the middle, however, in cases where the project proponent is not yet provided to the commission or the public, what would the project proponent have given to the commission at that stage of the game?
Likely not anything. I think that's a good point.
Okay.
Can I come back to the scheduling piece that you mentioned?
Yes.
Before? Are we going to, what's the process for determining how long it'll take for this process to work in a given case or series of cases, so that we can incorporate that in the scheduling that we're trying to figure out as we struggle with making deadlines and timelines realistic? Is there a mechanism or a process for figuring that out? Or-
Yeah, I think I'll give the general answer, then I'll defer to these gentlemen. What we did when we're providing our scope is that we came up with the ranges of the number of meetings that would be required for each one of these
Right.
different sessions. And the number of meetings or the number of engagements with Category 2 applicants would be, far less.
Right.
So, but it is anticipated that depending on the complexity of each engagement, that may vary, but we still have the outside ranges of how many meetings would be necessary. So I'm going to let them.
Well, I was just going to add that, and we're dealing with Category 2 applications, that I kind of thought we would be fitting into your time schedule and have to meet that. It would be worked out. We obviously, if we want applicants to participate in this process, we can't put a timeline that disadvantages them in terms of the timing. So we're prepared to move very quickly to keep in line, keep them on schedule with what you propose when you lock that in.
So basically, we go first and then.
Well, that's how I had assumed, but there could be some back and
No,
forth.
that's, I mean, you want, if we endorse this process, and then it seems to me we want to make it work, and so we want to give enough time for it to work. That's the issue.
And I think the most important thing is to start sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
because we don't have much time on the later side.
Right, right.
And even with applicants that are concerned about letting out too much information before they come to their plans, you can do things earlier in the process, such as having us come out to the regional meetings to explain how how our statute works and how the process with us works and what this will be, organizational meetings. Potentially there are things that you can do earlier in the process even for applicants, but I couldn't agree more, especially with there's a tremendous amount of pent-up energy out there in the potential surrounding
Right.
communities, and they want information absolutely right now, and potentially even before it exists.
Right.
So applicants may want to, weigh that in how they move forward.
We've also had interest, you again ran a forum here in Boston several months ago on sustainability and design. There's a lot of interest in trying to replicate something along that line at our way. So we think there's some, again, general information that can be helpful, again, at the front end.
Great.
Taking a question in somewhat different direction, is you sit down with potential applicants, as you kind of organize hosts and surrounding communities.
Surrounding communities only.
No. Part of is convener involves host communities as
Yeah.
well.
Host communities as well?
Yeah. Well, host communities will be involved in the process because they have to provide the data as
Right.
part of what we're going to evaluate. Even though the primary relationship will be between the applicant and the communities as they're evaluating these.
Right.
We think that it's important to allow the host communities to specify that the host
To be at
community
the
should be
table as well.
allowed to be a participant in that process. It's very important to them, obviously, what occurs in this process.
Instead of thinking not just narrowly within the lens of negative impacts, do you feel at all charged or having some interest in talking about what could be the positive impacts from these projects? I mean, I'm picking up Joelle's comment about, a housing issue. Or, Tim, you have a transportation plan which, if you use this intersection as opposed to back here, you could solve a long-term problem from within the region. I mean,
Yeah, there's
Kinda keep it-
opportunities. We talk with the Transit Authority all the time about other than single occupant automobile access to these facilities. I sit on the steering committee that the community colleges have together to try to get workers, again, from the immediate area where these proposals would be, because it goes back to what I said earlier about mitigating traffic, but also getting people employed from the region in which these facilities sit. So, yeah, that's why I said at the outset, we tend to be always thought about as the problem solvers, but we're also the opportunity seekers. So we want to try to leverage the benefits to the maximum extent possible as well.
That's a great,
That's a good question.
that's a great sort of capstone to this conversation.
Right.
If you're able to use this position and this role to help maximize the impact and communicate constructively with the bidders and so forth, I mean, that's great. Okay, I think we should probably have a vote to accept Ombudsman Ziemba's proposal, if we're ready to do that.
Yes.
Yes, very much. I would
So
like to move that, to accept this proposal, to put it forward and have this commission endorse it and hope that people participate.
And follow his recommendations
And-
as outlined in the memorandum of March 12th, or whatever it is.
What I would also recommend, Mr. Chairman, is that if people have comments on this, we can certainly send it out to host the surrounding communities. If people have comments on this process, they can please send those to us, and we can incorporate those into our planning.
Okay, great.
Do I second that motion?
Yeah, obviously, we hope that you'll bring us an update as to your conversations with the Worcester Planning Commission.
Great.
Yeah, that would be great if you would come in once in a while, and John, maybe some kind of an organized basis, and, every month or whatever, and just kind of give us a sense of what's going on.
Yeah,
That'd be
absolutely,
great.
and regardless of what happens or which applicants decide to use this or not, I mean, I think John certainly knows, and hopefully the commission knows that we are a resource to you.
Yeah.
Because this will, your questions will go beyond the process that this entails, and we are at your disposal.
Right. Well, thank you. And one step that we've talked about a lot is the process of evaluation when these proposals come in. And Commissioner McHugh and Commissioner Stebbins are working on plotting that out. And Commissioner Stebbins is working on what resources are we going to need to help us evaluate, what outside resources. And RPAs are on that list. I'm not exactly sure. We don't know exactly, who's going to get picked for what. But we appreciate that offer and probably will be taking you up on it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Great job. Great, exciting. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor of Commissioner? All in favor of Commissioner Zuniga's motion? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you
unanimously.
very much.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Good to see you, Joel.
Thank you, Joe.
Take a quick break.
Yeah. Maybe a quick,
Break? Yeah, let's take a quick break and we'll be back. We were on public education information. We will reconvene at 2:22. The preparation for Region C discussion, just a couple of things to say. In order, we have delayed the meeting. We're not going to start at 1, we're going to start at 4. That'll make it easier for some people to get there and also make it easier for people who have to work to attend. So the meeting is going to start at 4 rather than at 1.
Next week's meeting.
Next week's meeting, the Region C meeting in Bristol Community College in Fall River, I guess, right? Yeah. And anybody who wants to speak, do be sure to sign up, because we do need to organize that. Representatives of entities or public officials are invited to speak, but do sign up, please. And that's it for that. Regulation review. Who's leading this charge? Commissioner McHugh, is that you?
Mr. Grossman was going to give us a brief
Okay.
update. He is at the wheelhouse of the regulation promulgation process, in the wheelhouse,
It's in the wheel.
at the wheel.
That's right. Good
All
afternoon,
right.
thank you. I think we're moving right on schedule, and I've circulated, of course, the updated drafts. As you'll observe, there are a couple of new sections in them that pertain to fees, transfers of interest, conservatorships, and the issuance of new licenses in the event of circumstances that lead to an individual not being able to continue on with holding the license. So those are 4 of the new sections that we haven't had a chance to discuss that are contained in the draft. As Commissioner McHugh mentioned yesterday, we had an opportunity to meet with the gaming consultants as well as Steve Anderson and the general counsel and Commissioner McHugh. And I sat down, and I think we had a very productive meeting. All those proposed updates have been circulated to you for your consideration. As you'll observe in there, there are a couple of policy decisions that still need to be decided that we will bring before you and hopefully have resolved. The end date here, at least preliminarily, that we're looking at is March 29th. That is the date that, as we discussed yesterday or 2 days ago, I can't remember, that we anticipate circulating our language and our summaries to the Local Government Advisory Council. So we'd like to have our draft language relatively set in place by that day, which means that I think we'll need to set some time aside that week. The 29th is that Friday, to get together for a session to discuss the regulations by the commission in an open setting like this. If it makes sense, we could set aside the 25th, which is that Monday, which would allow us to go through the regs, answer any questions, resolve any outstanding policy issues, and then also give us an opportunity to reconvene on that Thursday, which would be the 28th, to tie up any loose ends, make any drafting adjustments, and then hopefully be able to set the regs on the path to the public hearing, which would be a few weeks down the road. So that's the big picture. In the interim, as Commissioner McHugh mentioned, there are 3 areas that we're working on, and we'll begin active drafting on some of them shortly, involving we have the updates to the existing regulations, the evaluation criteria that you're presently working on, and some hearing procedures that we need to work out so we can bring before you for review that will kind of define how the issuance of the license will take place, any surrounding community issues and things of the sort will be handled. So that's where we are. We're looking to be able to get you some of this language next week. But in the interim, we have all of the existing language that we've sent to you that hopefully we can take a crack at reviewing and locking into place within the next couple of weeks. So I think that's an update as to where we are right now.
Thinking about the scheduling, if we, just talking about having another public meeting on the 25th, would that be something, Commissioner McHugh, we could combine with another round on the evaluation? Would that be a good time for that?
Sequentially, the remaining parts of this process feed off of completing the evaluation matrix, or the evaluation criteria. It doesn't have to be a matrix. And I think we could do that. We can take what we did yesterday, polish up that matrix and finish filling it out. Use that as a basis for drafting what we're going to draft about the application contents. We're not going to put everything in everything that was on that matrix into a regulation. Some of it's just going to be in the application.
Right.
And then fine tune it if and to the extent necessary after we consider further the evaluation criteria and the information that we're looking for. So we could do that on Monday, the 25th, and at the same time have before us a draft regulation that outlines where we are. We're proceeding on 2 tracks simultaneously. The same is true of the bigger, well, not the bigger, an equally important piece, and that is the hearing process. I'm going to send to you all tomorrow. I meant to do it, I tried to get to it today. We've been here a lot. A discussion outline of a processing piece. What do we do when we get these applications? Who do they go to, in what sequence, when do we have what kind of hearings? And we can consider that on the same day. By then, we will have had a chance to meet with some of the people that we're going to meet with, at least one, to give us an idea of how other entities look at evaluating competitive large proposals.
Right.
And in the meantime, draft some regulations that are general in scope and may serve the purpose perfectly well. We want to retain a lot of discretion and consider those on Monday, those regulations on Monday, as well as discussing at a higher level the workflow. So I think the answer to your question is yes, and I could have probably just said that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to think out loud.
I'm glad you got around it. I came back just in time for the yes. Okay, so let's plan on Monday.
There's always a transcript.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Let's plan on a Monday afternoon, Monday the 25th afternoon, that would deal with as much of both of these issues as we can. I think that's a good plan. And actually, hearing the process is helpful.
To the extent you did.
Right. I was thinking about Wes Welker.
Yes, I know.
Okay, is there anything else on, okay, it's a yeoman job again, just, very few people appreciate just how much work is behind all these things, and writing the regs is one of them, so thanks to all of you guys.
Thank you.
Director Durenberger. You're getting many kudos. You and the commission, like Massachusetts, are getting many kudos for leading the pack on the fixing the horse doping and stuff. It's amazing. It's great.
Yeah, it's great.
We're trying to lead you there.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so this afternoon, I really don't have much of an administrative update, so I think we will leave that for the next meeting.
Well, let me just, this is sort of an administrative update, but I mentioned to you, we'd thought about, I'd thought about the idea of having us be as involved as we could in the openings of the 2 tracks, April 15th and June 1st, I think. And exactly what that means, I don't know. We certainly want to promote it. This is our industry. We want to promote it. And if we can be involved in some way to enhance it or come up with ideas, I thought that would be interesting and fun. I did talk with both Chip Tuttle and Gary Piankowski, and they both were enthusiastic about having us be very involved. So I said, I got some wild and crazy ideas which we can talk about, but I think it'd be fun to have us brainstorm a little bit about how we can be involved. We certainly want to use our media and social media and our media contacts to promote it. So I wanted you to know they both said they thought it would be great, and we'll brainstorm on that a little bit.
Okay. Any other administrative update?
Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You'll let us know if his ideas.
Got back just in time. Okay.
This is good.
This is good. This is the 4th or 5th meeting of the week.
Right, you can tell, right? Punch-drunk commissioners and their staff.
All right, duly noted. So what we've got here, I think, all of the packet in front of you is racing-related, the regulations. And so I think the easiest thing to do is just to sort of point out what's in there and what it is. So there is at the bottom, the thickest packet is the regulations, the proposed changes as they were first presented to the commission back on January 31st. That's the big fat packet. In the middle there should be the written comments received. And let's see here, and any other discussion that was, I think we had one discussion on February 25th at the public hearing. And then the memorandum at the top of your packet that's got 7B on it basically talks about where we are in terms of incorporating those comments and some additional staff analysis that's been done since that time. So the double-sided thing kind of threw me off, but if you look at the back page of the memorandum, I guess that would be page 2. At the top there, you'll see the comments that we received from the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office on these. Basically, when they sent back the long form, they reprinted it, and of course, they changed all references to the Racing Commission to the Gaming Commission and updated the gender-neutral pronouns and did the administrative changes that are listed there. Following that is a list of rules that we have recommended changes to the recommended changes and the reasons why we've done that. So that's either incorporating public comment or staff analysis. I believe there are 6 of them. So what you'll see is the red line, the latest red line version, and then the comment, the reasons why behind that. And I'm happy to either go over them individually, or I don't think that any of them rise to that level, but if you have questions, I can certainly answer them. And then we can kind of do this in a bifurcated way. One would be, I guess I would recommend that the commission approve these changes, these amendments to the amendments. And then the second part of that would be whether or not, we have to go through the emergency process, as I explained on Tuesday, because of the unique statutory requirement for the racing division. So we could do one of 2 things. We were going the emergency route so that they would be in effect prior to the start of live racing. So that doesn't mean that the emergency is this afternoon. So I can, if you would like, I can get the long form for you and show that to you. I just didn't have that document ready today. That would be incorporating the administrative changes from the Commonwealth as well as these 6 amendments that I brought to you today. Or you could just vote today and we could proceed from there.
I don't see any reason to wait, but I'm certainly open to it if
I don't either. The changes are,
Changes are clear and
Yes.
Right.
Pure technical.
Mhm.
Right.
And the emergency regs
Right.
process seems absolutely crucial, so I don't think that's debatable, so.
The only thing is, I assume we're gonna go the emergency route and the formal promulgation route at the same time, right? And
So,
have we
right.
cleared that with this, so that we don't have to, at the end of the emergency period, start the formal promulgation period? And they're gonna be running simultaneously.
Yeah,
right?
we've teed up the.
I'm sorry, I'm particularly thinking about the 60-day waiting period for the legislature to act.
Right,
Yeah,
yes, they'll be in parallel.
yeah, okay.
Okay. Any more questions, discussions? So maybe we have a motion to adopt.
I move that we accept Director Durberger's recommendations and we approve the changes as well as the entire CO5, CMR 3.00 and 3.400.
And to adopt them as emergency.
And adopt same as emergency regulations.
And as permanent regulations
And as
simultaneously.
permanent, right.
Right,
Right,
And as permanent regulations simultaneously.
right.
good.
Second.
Okay. So we're voting to accept the changes, adopt them as emergency regs, and also proceed with the customary promulgation process.
Right.
the regular
Excellent
custom-
summary.
Right.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously.
I think
Next.
The next order of business is mine, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
As the hearing officer on behalf of the commission, I held 2 hearings on motions to reconsider decisions for occupational licensees. So this was a new piece to our process, the first time we had motions to reconsider. So those individuals are being notified of that tentative decision to their motion, and they will also be notified that they have 30 days to appeal to the full commission. That's all I have to report.
Okay. That's well said.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Research agenda, we're close, but nothing to announce. We talked about the evaluation criteria. I think that was really all that was on the agenda. Did you have some thoughts on the evaluation?
Yeah, I had additional thoughts that might as well follow up from yesterday's discussion. There's for good reasons. There's a lot of conversations that we've had relative to having the best possible or the best gaming operation as an important major component of the criteria. And one thing that came to mind after yesterday's meeting that should be self-evident, but I wanted to bring it up, is that the market can bear, that achieves the balance of what's possible here for our state and for our region. I wouldn't want to be in a position where, because of competition, I don't think anybody is thinking along these lines, but we have to be careful as we analyze these proposals that perhaps the biggest may not necessarily be the best. And I just wanted to kind of open a comment along those lines. I know that we have enough criteria relative to the strength, financial and otherwise, the marketing plans and their business plans, et cetera. But after yesterday's discussion, I felt I wanted to comment on an idea of really achieving the goals of the legislation, which may very well be one of striking the balance relative to all of the factors that we have.
Did you think that there either was an evaluation factor in there that would distort the process in some way, or is there an evaluation criteria that should be added?
Well, I was particularly thinking of the 5th category that we talked a lot about unique branding and the best gaming operation, if you will, destination, resort, et cetera. And I think that there's an element of balance that may go there. Now, I'll make a parenthesis, there are, all the other criteria in some way balance everything. There's a mitigation component, so that has a balancing effect by definition. And there's a job creation and economic development, so of course that all becomes part of the mix. But I was particularly thinking of if we call out this fifth category, I thought that an element of what's a strong and enduring proposal is something that I want to just talk about and bring up.
Okay.
That ties back into our mission statement, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
to have the best variety of different things, plus providing a reasonable return.
And we've repeatedly said, you know,
Right.
we want the competition in order to push the bidders to really perform up to their best, but short of either making stuff up or, but more importantly, short of compromising their financial stability. I've used the cable television industry model many times, that we don't want to push so hard that we force people into stretching beyond their ability to really perform. That does nobody any good. So I mean, I think we're sensitive to that balance. And maybe there's a place for stating it more explicitly when I take a redraft of Section 5, we can see what you think there. But I think
Yeah.
I think we're very sensitive to that issue.
Right.
And there are plenty of places where people just get really greedy and just, you know, say more, and put their hands out and put tremendous pressure on bidders to just promise, because they know they're not gonna get selected if they don't overpromise. And I think we've been pretty aggressive about saying that's not what we're trying to do here.
Right. And I for one, can have very clear in my mind that during the financial evaluation, there's a big piece of that. Assessing projections, testing the models, looking at track record, et cetera. But I felt that at least in the category 5 or as a whole, as you're agreeing, there's this risk mitigation element that I think is very important, whether we call it balance or all of the above. I think it's important.
Yeah, okay, I agree.
And that really ties back into the discussion we just had about the host and surrounding communities too. I mean, that's a piece to keep in mind for everybody to keep in mind.
Yeah,
Right.
that this is about impacts, not free cash.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and separate additional point, if you're finished with that.
Yes.
I sent around a note with Rick Day's comments, who had raised some of the same concerns you had raised about the operational rigor of the facilities. And he had sent around a note saying that he thought we ought to add to our evaluation criteria some of the things I think you were talking about security and cash management and stuff like that. So there's a line to be walked between what is just in our regs, how we will spec out, you must have such and such surveillance and so forth, versus also giving them an opportunity to show that they really performed to best practice, and that would be one of the evaluation criteria, you know, in the operations of the facility itself, for the casino itself, will be one of the evaluation criteria. So that was just, I thought, reinforced the point you were
Compliance
making.
records as well.
Yeah, all that stuff. Okay, anything else? Do we have a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Excellent. Love it.